So this is going to be the second in our series on the Rambam, on Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. The Rambam wrote three major works and many other essays, letters. The Rambam was very prolific. And his great fame in the Jewish world came due to his writings. The Rambam also wrote major works on medicine, the medicine of his time, naturally. The Rambam was seen as an expert in pharmacology and drugs, herbs. The Rambam was a believer in pretty much in natural medicine. I don't think that in the 12th and 13th centuries, without the diagnostic tools and without the technology that we have today, that any other type of medicine really was possible. But the Rambam was recognized as being an outstanding expert in it. Rambam was also a believer in preventive medicine. In other words, he prescribed, we even find it in his books of halacha, in the Mishna Torah, the Rambam prescribes good eating habits, good sleeping habits. The Rambam says you should sleep 8 hours a night. Some people are more machmir, they sleep longer. The Rambam himself, naturally, like all doctors, never took his own advice. And the Rambam is such a strong believer in preventive medicine, in the fact that to a great extent we control what will happen to us, that he goes to extremes. Many times you take a good rational point and you stretch it to its extreme and it becomes a little less rational. But the Rambam confronts the fact that we find in the Chumash Bereshis, we find in the Sefer Bereshit that there were 38 people who lived very long lives. 969 years, 960 years, 800 years, 600 years. So how do we deal with that? So most of the Meforshim say that nature and life itself was far different before the period of the flood, before the Mabul, and therefore everything that happened before the Mabul can't be judged by our standards today. But we still find that people lived a long time. Avraham Avinu lives 175 years, Yitzchak lives 180, Yaakov lives 147, and he complains that he had a short life. Yosef lives 110, Moshe lives 120. How do we somehow deal with that when by the time of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, in his famous psalm in Tehillim, says, Yemei shnoseinu bohem shivim shona. The average lifespan is 70 years. V'im bigvurot shmonim shona, and if a person reaches strength, if he's specially endowed, then it's 80 years. Moshe lives 120, Aaron lives 120. The Rambam's answer, which is very rational, but it's so rational that it becomes irrational, is that these people took care of themselves. They ate food that was good for them rather than just good food. And they got enough sleep, and they did exercise, and they took care of themselves. We find later in the Talmud that when the rabbis met someone of advanced age, they always asked him, Bameh harachta yomim? How come you're so old? Which is a question my little grandchildren always ask me. Zadie, how come you're so old? So the Talmud never answers the Rambam's answer that people took care of themselves. or that, you know, they did exercise every day, or they didn't live under stress, whatever. That's not the answer. The answer always given is that a person had the merit of good deeds. He had the schar of a mitzvah, or that the Lord kept him or her alive for a certain purpose. And that's why the person outlived, so to speak, the actuarial table. But the Rambam doesn't adopt that. The Rambam adopts rather his idea, as I mentioned, the preventive medicine, of natural medicine, of the fact that people took care of themselves. If you take care of yourselves, you'll be fine. I think in the modern world today, we certainly tend to ascribe a lot to genetics. Statistically, I mean, it's not a rule of all statistics don't apply to any one individual. But statistically, if a person comes from a family that's long lived, has parents that lived to a great age, and he has grandparents that lived to a great age, so then statistically, the person will also probably live to a great age. And unfortunately, the converse is also true. That people that come from short-lived families, so then their genes, so to speak, are against them. The Rambam doesn't speak in those terms at all. The Rambam speaks only in terms of health, of diet, of the avoidance of stress. And in his medical works, the Rambam is very, very strong in the use of natural herbs, medicines. He has long treatises on stomach problems, intestinal problems, the use of diuretics. He was aware, for instance, that diuretics will reduce a person's blood pressure and will reduce a person's stress. All sorts of things that, for his time at least, were top-of-the-line medicine. Now, the wonderful thing about medicine is that it changes every 20, 30 years. And what was accepted and held to be valid in one generation, the next generation many times is refuted. I remember when I grew up as a child, thank God my only major experience in a hospital was that they took out my tonsils. Every Jewish child had his tonsils taken out in America in the 1930s and 1940s and even 1950s. Mm-hmm. It was a rite of passage. The ice cream. It was, and then they gave you ice cream to eat, right? You remember that, right? And so everybody had their tonsils. So today they tell you that it's terrible to take out your tonsils because of the fact that it makes you susceptible to all sorts of throat infections and other things. So I can't get my tonsils back. But medicine changes. And therefore, to view the medicine of the Rambam, to view the medicine of Maimonides in the light of CAT scans and MRIs and laser surgery and all of the other technological advances that we have in our time is really not fair because it doesn't give us an assessment. The Rambam was noted as a great diagnostician. Now, today, a great diagnostician really reads a computer. By the time the X-rays and the MRI and the blood tests and everything else come back, so you got a pretty good picture of the person and what problem, if any, there exists. But in a world where none of that existed, and you have to look in the person's eyes, or on his face, or the color of the skin, etc., and determine from that, so then being at least having a reputation as a great diagnostician, it was a very, very important thing, and it was a great compliment to his medical prowess that he was able to do so. So those books were